So if you could take your seats, please. Good evening. My name is Jerold Kayden, and I'm a professor of urban planning and design here at the Graduate School of Design. But more importantly, tonight and tomorrow, I'm co-chair with David van der Leer, who's executive director of the Van Alen Institute of the Design Competition Conference. As you can see, we have a very ambitious program composed of speakers, moderators, and audience members to criticize, complement, and otherwise dissect design competitions as a popular mechanism to procure design outcomes that hopefully contribute to better built and natural environments. My own interest in design competitions has been especially piqued by recent claims that, compared to traditional procurement mechanisms, they are a superior process for securing innovative, creative, interdisciplinary outcomes best suited to increasingly complicated questions of our time. To solve the challenge of climate change, challenge the design community. To satisfy my own intellectual curiosity about design competitions as the chicken soup for solving the world's problems, I've been teaching a course here at the GSD for the past 2 years on design competitions, with an ever larger class that may initially think that the course is going to teach them how to win, and perhaps it does, in fact, but that also engages in critical inquiry about this widely discussed, yet relatively understudied phenomenon. So let's get to it. Before, let me just mention that tomorrow at 8:30, there will be coffee outside. The conference starts tomorrow as well at 9 o'clock and runs till 5 o'clock or so. And finally, let me extend some heartfelt thanks to the people who we all know genuinely make these sorts of conferences possible, even if their names are not on the program. At Van Alen, let me extend thanks to Jerome Cho and Liz DeWolf, just absolutely terrific collaborators. And here at the GSD, to Ben Prosky, and the wonderful Chantal Blakely and James Evans. And Moisen, it's great to have you here as well. And Moisen will be working tonight, right there in front of the room. But really, Ben and Chantal and James, thank you very much as well. And then finally, delightfully, to my terrific co-chair and colleague, David van der Leer.
Good evening, everybody, and thank you, Jerold. It has actually been a really fun ride to work with Jerold. For everybody who knows him, so much energy and really inspiring, so thank you for that part of the process already. I would like to also extend a thanks to our teams. We have fantastic teams. Jerome on our side, Liz doing a great job, as well as the team here, Ben, Chantal and James. And of course, thank you to the school for hosting this conference. Van Alen Institute has been organizing competitions for 120 years, very long time. And when you take over at Van Alen Institute as director, it's kind of scary, especially when you come from a place where you're not where you're not competing for work, but where you're commissioning work. And that's what I had done 5 years before coming to the Guggenheim, to add my personal story to this mix. And I like commissioning work because you can work very closely with people, develop a relationship and get an excellent design product or an excellent art product at the end of the process. And starting at Van Alen and suddenly having to run competitions, I was like, how do we do this? Because it's sometimes a little too hands-off. So that's actually been interesting because we see our process changing over these past years. Instead of always being hands-off, we're actually very hands-on these days. And instead of only competing for the work, we're probably some people's worst nightmare, some other people's best friends, but really trying to make the design projects in our competitions much better. So for us, it's very exciting to look at a conference like this and trying to learn more about what is the value of competitions moving forward, how can we change them, and what can we all learn. Rest me to introduce Kathleen McGuigan, the editor-in-chief of Architectural Records, who has also been a very nice collaborator, a very good collaborator with us over the past months in a large survey that we ran, which I will be telling more about tomorrow morning. And Kathleen's evening will be largely focused on personal stories from a very good architects, and of course Moisten as well as his mix. So thank you all for coming, and I look forward to seeing you over the coming day and a half for good discussions. So if you have questions, really make sure to ask them also. Thank you.
Well, I'm very happy to be back here in Piper Auditorium, where I spent quite a bit of time as a Loeb Fellow about 20 years ago. We're kind of deciphering the graphics, David. You're going to have to explain what's... I guess this is a roll of the dice for me tonight. I did not get the role of moderator through a competition. I think I paid a bribe or something. Anyway, it's wonderful to be here. It's... Architectural Record was very pleased to be a partner media sponsor of the survey. David came to us, and the Van Alen Institute had decided to put this together. And if you haven't seen it yet, it's very interesting. The results are very interesting and have led to a series of recommendations and propositions that David and his team pulled together from the results. And I know things will come out of this conference tomorrow, which will further those ideas for how to improve competitions. But this is a very important subject to Architectural Record and to our readers, both nationally and around the world, and particularly to younger practitioners. And it was interesting that overwhelmingly the respondents to the Van Alen Architectural Record survey were under 44, which, as we know in architecture, is considered really, really young. So, most people think of design competitions in terms of the ultimate results, for better or worse, what the impact is on the public, and we can all think of some very major competitions in the last few years and what the impact has been on the public realm. One of the questions the survey respondents were asked that I thought was really interesting was what they thought the most important or influential competitions have been of the last decade. And of the 4 top ones, 2 of them are going to be case studies tomorrow, which I think is great. One is the Guggenheim Helsinki, which I think today they were unveiling yet more details for an exhibition that is opening in Helsinki about the 6 finalists. And also Rebuild by Design, which was the HUD-sponsored competition in response to Hurricane Sandy. So that was very interesting. The other 2 was the High Line and, I'm blanking. 9/11. The 9/11 Memorial, indeed. Not the whole 9/11. Well, that competition was more than a decade ago. That was a crazy thing. We might get into that a little bit in this discussion. In any event, I want to get right to this. We have a wonderful trio tonight who are going to speak to us. I'm just going to introduce them in the order in which they're going to speak. They will each present. Then we're going to have a little conversation, and then we will open it up to all of you. First up is Craig Dykers, who really provides a kind of perfect textbook case for this conference. An American architect who leads an international firm, Snøhetta, with offices in New York, Oslo, and points beyond. And Craig came to kind of overnight acclaim and success with the winning design for the library in Alexandria, Egypt in 1989, which he will tell us about. And that was before he and his design team had even come together to form the firm. So it was an incredible, huge early success. The office, Snøhetta, enters many competitions. We're going to hear about some of them tonight. And they work at almost every scale, from big urban design projects to having recently redesigned Norway's currency. Those little bills. You'll tell us about that too. Was that a competition? Yes. Francine Huben is the founder and creative director of the Dutch firm Mecanoo. She told me it can be pronounced almost any way, no matter which, and I guess everybody does, so forgive me if I mashed it. I can spell it, I just did not know how to pronounce it, which is based in Delft with offices in the UK and Taiwan. Mecanoo's many public projects include the library in Birmingham, Great Britain, the Palace of Justice in Cordoba, Spain, and I think what is your first project to be completed here in the U.S., which is right in Roxbury, which is opening on Saturday, which is very exciting, which is the new Boston School Department, which her firm designed with Sasaki. So that's a wonderful project right here. And Mohsen Mostafavi, of course, I'm not going to give you any kind of lengthy. If there's anybody in the room who doesn't know who you are, they should leave immediately. He is the terrific dean of this school and a professor, and in addition to his work as an educator and a scholar, of course, he brings extensive experience as a juror on major architectural competitions and many prizes, so I know he will bring an enormous amount of insight to our discussion. So let us begin. Craig.
Thanks. As you know, our practice is named after a mountain, Snøhetta, which I suppose is in itself a kind of a competition. We climb it every year, and there's a competition to get to the top. So I suppose it's in our blood. One thing I did want to mention very quickly is that we are not just architects. We're landscape architects, interior architects, and branding and graphic designers. Oh, that bottom one is supposed to say brand. Sorry, I misplaced my spelling there. Copy and paste error. I would say that we've been involved in competitions with all of these groups, except for our interior designers, interestingly, for 25 years. We just got invited to our first interior design competition yesterday, actually, for a building that we are designing as architects. So that's kind of a strange condition to be in. We have been involved with hundreds of competitions around the world, many obviously in the Americas and in Europe and Middle East. Much of our work has been focused on acquiring sort of connections through design competitions. When we began, it were primarily open competitions that we entered, which I'll talk about, but today we generally work primarily with invited competitions. I was looking at this when I made it and thought if acquisition is a sport having to do with rifle ranges, we would be using a shotgun, I suppose, rather than a sniper weapon. It sort of looks like the bullets just kind of sprayed across the world. And so we do try to be focused, though, about how we approach the work. I would say that I have lost my patience for statistics during this period. There have been times where we have won every single competition we entered. I think the longest run we had was 18 consecutive wins without a loss. And then we've lost every single competition we've entered, where I think we've lost 12 in a row. So in a sense, it's hard to really look at the character of these things as some sort of identifiable future, although one can talk about it in different ways. Our first win was when all of us were under the age of 30 to build the Library of Alexandria in Egypt. So we were just out of school, group of young kids who just were very idealistic. I remember when we won and we went to Egypt to collect our prize money, we used all of our prize money to purchase the air tickets to go collect the prize money, so it was a zero-sum game. We also arrived being quite ratty-looking, long hair and sort of holes in our jeans. We didn't have any real money at all, and they looked at us and said, "Well, who are you?" And we said, "We're Snøhetta." And they kind of got a ghostly look on their face and said, "You're too young to be the architect." And we said, "Well, it's a good thing you chose young architect, because anyone older will be dead by the time this building is built," and it took 13 years to complete. One of the things I can say about the process, though, was in retrospect, it was clearly the best resolved competition program of any competition we've been in 25 years. It was absolutely an immaculate program. It was well written by a number of professionals, and it was so clear and so intuitive in many ways that our design, and part of the reason we were told that we won, was that it was essentially a three-dimensional representation of the diagrams that they had provided in the competition brief. So there was one of the goofy diagrams they gave where the Library of Alexandria was imposed upon Alexander the Great's head. And if you look at the layout, well, you know, I actually liked that. I thought it was great that they had this kind of strange idea about something other than a clearly functional plan. But if you see our plan and sort of compare it to these sort of bubbles in a brief look with your eye, you'll see that it's very, very similar. Another thing was interesting was that when we were doing this competition, I recall as we were putting the sheets together, and this is something I've used since then, so if you are looking for interesting tips on how to win competitions, I said, when you have a competition where there are hundreds, if not thousands of entrants, you've got to get people to stop and look at your work. And so we said, maybe we should make our sheets look like a flag, because people stop and look at flags, and we just chose the Japanese flag, which you see on the left. And in the end, we had one sheet which was literally just that circle on a piece of white background. All the other competitors filled the sheets with information. It was almost too hard to understand their project. So the jurors had told us that was a helpful tip. But you can see the project as it was built 13 years later. And in many ways, you can see how similar it is to the competition entry. So that's a part of a model we built right at the time of winning the competition in the upper left. And then 13 years later, the building as it was completed. And I thought that was an intriguing thing. You sort of have to be a bulldog. As they say, winning a competition is the least of your challenges. Getting the buildings built and actually having them resemble in some way your initial idea is just as much, if not more, of a challenge. The section of the building was intriguing, and in fact was the first time such a design had been created for a library with these terraced features, which many people often compared to Gund Hall here after we released it in 1989, so this was quite a long time ago. And here you can see the original competition entry. This was before computers were used, so all of that was hand-drawn. And while we finished the building, during the middle of the process, during construction documents, suddenly computers were everywhere, so we had to actually switch from handmade drawings to computer drawings. But that's one of the handmade ones, and of course the final construction above. And I think the similarity is rather uncanny, despite the decade that had passed. And it was a successful project. It's built, it's occupied very well, still has visitors some years later, even through all the turmoil that has occurred since the Arab Spring. The other competition that we're well known for is the winning of the Norwegian National Opera in Oslo. Both of these were international anonymous competitions, so our names were not included, and many of the world's most well-known architects were involved in both of these competitions. The first one, of course, was intriguing because no one knew who we were. In this one, at least some people, especially in Norway, knew who we were. So when we won, they didn't ask us why we were too young. But here's the initial competition entry on the left, which was, again, just at about the time computers were only beginning to be used. So you can see how simple it was. And then the final construction documentation there on the right. You'll see there are a number of minor changes, but again, keeping track of the design after winning the competition was a big issue for us. And the modifications really only helped improve it. There's the flag we used for that project. It was the Czech flag. Again, it was just an odd thing that helped drove us to make these layouts and allow them to be seen in a particular way by a very complex jury selection process. The original renderings up above, that was back when Form Z was the top-of-the-line graphics program. And just after winning the competition, the later renderings. And here you can see just before it was completed and one of the initial renderings. Again, very many similarities that we were able to manage, or we were able to maintain throughout the period of construction and detail design. The lobbies changed quite a bit, but also maintained much integrity. The last competition I'll mention very briefly, as we don't have a lot of time, was a competition to build a new museum or cultural complex at the site of the World Trade Center disasters. This was in 2004, so 3 years after the tragedies occurred. There had already been design competitions for the master plan and for other structures. And when we arrived, the site was still being cleaned up. And there was still a very volatile situation. Daniel Liebeskind, along with Michael Arad, had two master plans which were sort of being merged into one that situated a very large building in the northeast corner of the site that we were intended to create. This was the master plan drawing. That's not our design. We created a scheme that we recognized would always be the smallest thing on the site. So we were kind of surrounded by giants. And we always, despite the smallness of it in relation to its neighbors, it was considered very large because it was on the memorial site itself. But our design, original design for that building was a quite large structure, about 400,000 square feet, lifted in the air, which you could pass through, and had a very intriguing method of bringing daylight down to the Memorial Plaza itself and also onto the train station below ground that was designed by Calatrava. But politics was quite significant in this project. So a number of things occurred over the years. The project lost its clients. It was merged with another museum, which was below grade, dedicated to the events of September 11th. And there was a constant discussion about the competition that we had originally entered and how valid was it once the clients left the building and there was a new program. But the competition was strong enough as an idea that it held us into a connection to the project, which we eventually adjusted in size and scale. And this was eventually the building that was built, and it became completely new building. So the final construction has nothing to do with the original competition design, so very different from the previous two examples I gave, where it is now an entry pavilion. It's still not completed, actually, so there's still work to be done around the site for the museum, which is below grade. But when it opened, we did get a number of visitors that entered the design, and many of them didn't know there were two architects involved, and I was intrigued by the idea that most of them felt the experience was seamless. Probably the strangest competition we've done was here in America for North Carolina State University. The dean of that university, or of the College of Design, Marvin Malika, decided to have a design competition of a very unusual variety. He invited a number of architects to visit the campus, so everybody came and we got to see what was going on in the landscape and in the university itself. And then they asked all the architects to lock themselves in rooms in a kind of basement of a campus planning building. And each of the architects were not able to get out of those rooms except to go to the toilet. And we had sort of 8 hours to design a building together with a fictitious program using our team that we brought with us. And they gave us 2 students to be on the team as well. So we were all prepared and we built ourselves this space. And every now and then throughout the day, the jurors would come in and observe us making the design. It was very strange, and I remember as we were doing it, one of the jurors came in with their daughter, and the daughter, who was younger, who wanted to be an architect, said, "Daddy, I really like these people. They're the best, but their building is so ugly." And so strangely enough, we won the competition. We had done lots of little study models, and we did win. And it was an interesting moment. But the building that we designed in the competition room was not the building we made. We went into a new process after that, which reincarnated the process we created in that room in the basement. And the competition for us was more about the process than it was about the design. And so we rebuilt that process in a more regular environment where we could go to the toilet and get food. And we eventually built this building, which has nothing to do with the girl was right, the little girl. It was an ugly building that we had designed, and you might have seen some images of it around. That's the interior of it. I'm going to stop by just pushing through a few little matrices. We do have, something happened when it got transferred to probably Mac. I don't know why but you can read that. It says payment, author, and so on. But essentially, we've created a kind of a matrix which we sometimes use to understand if we're going to enter a competition or what it means. There's a huge number of parameters. A lot of them have to do with the jury, which I'll show you in the next slide. But whether they're paid or unpaid, are they single or multi-stage competitions? Are they anonymous or identified? Are they solitary competitions for just the designers, or do they expect a team? Is your experience relevant or not? Is it an informal delivery process? And most importantly, the last one at the end, do they expect fee proposals and cost estimates and so on, which is really an intriguing question. The jury is also a very important part of this process. I've been on juries, as you can see there where it says architects and bureaucrats. I was once a jury chair for the European Central Bank in Frankfurt. We had 15 architects on the jury and 35 lawyers. which was astonishing. And every time we said something, oh, that's really beautiful, the lawyers would jump up and say, quantify what beautiful means. You can't say beautiful unless you can quantify it. So, you know, how much of that is involved in this process is intriguing. More architects should get involved in being jurors in competitions. And also, of course, are the criteria published? How well do you know the criteria? After you win, you have to kind of convince the client that what you've got can sort of meet the general parameters that form buildings. So we have to, once again, this is after we won a competition, re-educating the client as to what we've made and how it can actually be built. And finally, there are methods, I think, to create design competitions that are well considered, and I would say there's too much here to read. We can talk about that later, but you can design a design competition, and there's plenty of experience out there to make better ones. I would say in general, though, that I don't have any particular alignment with design competitions or with other types of competitions. To me, everything is a competition. I risk design sensibilities, whether I've been given the commission directly or not. So I treat everything as an experiment to a certain level, but I would say that in understanding why it is we do things, we have to have a wide range of respect for different types of practices. In Europe, people often complain there are too many competitions. Here, they often complain there aren't enough. It's like medicine in my mind. So when you're sick, you don't just limit yourself to one type of prognosis. You try to understand all kinds of things, whether it's alternative medicine or traditional medicine, Eastern, Western medicine. You should be able to imbibe all of these things to make a healthy built environment. So there is no silver bullet, I would say, is my conclusion to that. Each type of competition we've been in has a different need and a different sensibility, and you just have to learn about all of them. We say that competitions are problematic for us because often you don't get paid, but even architects ask other people to do things without getting paid. We ask builders to bid on projects. We don't pay them for their bids. So we also have to be careful that we don't have a double standard. And I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Let me see. Hello. How does this work? I should go forward. To be honest, I never talk about competition. So the last day I was thinking, yeah, what I thought at first I thought I hate competitions, but then I thought it's not true. I also love them, and also I tried to look back in my own history, because I think a lot of you are also students or not. Yes, more. So I realized I did this I put on every slide I put a year. So this is 1979. There were totally no competitions in the Netherlands. This was the very first competition on housing. There was a big economic crisis. I think 220 offices submitted it. It was a two-step competition, and we won as one of the 5 that first step. Let me see, I do something wrong. So this was our first round competition design, 1979. I was 24 years old. I was still a student. My colleagues were also 2 students. And this is the picture of us. I also recognize I already loved the color blue, what became a kind of part of me. And this was the second round, what is in a way nice to have competitions in 2 steps. This was 1980. And then this is also nice, like you said, this is a photo collage. So we made a picture and then we made a model and put it in, so like all this handwork. And these were the drawings we made, also all handmade. So if you change something, you had to make the whole drawing again. We won. We won this competition. It was very unique in the Netherlands. I was, as I told you, still a student. I even had no time to finish school because I had to work on this project. So suddenly I had an office. We had an office. And at the same time, when the building was under construction, there was another competition. That was in 1984. And it was the UNESCO Worldwide Habitat competition. And you had to think what should be necessary on housing in the year 2000. It's funny because now it's 2015. And the prize was that you could make it, if you won with maybe worldwide from every country, I believe one person, I don't know exactly more, was to travel to Japan. And I wanted to go to Japan. So I participated in this open competition and won. The Dutch competition we won, but then it had to go to the next worldwide competition. But I remember we even didn't have the time to stick it very well to the board, so it didn't look like okay. But that was all these technical problems at that time. So this was here was the building under construction. This was 1984, so we had won 2 competitions. We finished school. Then I was officially an architect. That was 4 or 5 years later than winning the competition. And then this was us. I took it from internet now, so it's a little bit... So in 1984, officially Mecanoo was established, but officially in a way already in 1979. But the name Mecanoo, we gave ourselves the name at that time. So the 3 of us were the original ones, and we asked 2 other same year also to participate, and then we suddenly had to be office, so all the staff became 5 directors, no staff further. And then this building was published, was very successful. It was really a big, big change. It was not only we as architects, but the people who did write this brief to change housing, to that they really want to have different kind of housing for young people, not just houses for families and elderly. It was a big, big change in the culture of the Netherlands. Then, I didn't win the prize to go to Japan, but then I asked for a stipendium. So I got a stipendium to travel 3 months to Japan. I did it in 1985. So I went to visit, and that was very special. Nobody went to Japan in that time. So I went to Toyo Ito, Tadao Ando, Hasegawa, I know them all. But this is a funny picture, because Kazuo Seishima was working at Toyo Ito, and we went together to visit work of Toyo Ito. So it's so funny because we still know each other, but we are from the same year. So it's a kind of unique picture. 1985. And then I think the time after that, we did a lot of housing projects, schools. I think there were not that many competitions. I can't remember it. Then there was a big competition in, we are based here. This is our office now, or it was already there. I have somewhere this. This is our... I don't know how to deal with all these things here. Yeah? Push the button. Yeah, it's quite normal, yeah. So this is our office. Now this is our whole office, but we started to rent an office, a room at the very end of the corridor, what was the cheapest. Now we have the whole building and even our neighbors. So there was a competition, of course, for the library of the Technical University in Delft. We won. Later on, we won the competition for the master planning of the whole university, this park. So being close to the university, I like it very much because it also gives you the kind of... I also like the academic research. And then I think the change was also, I think from 2005, this was the first international competition we won. I also felt to go into international competitions, you also have to be, the office has to be very well organized. Otherwise, you cannot focus on your creativity, but also you cannot travel as much if at home it's not well organized. At home, I mean the office. So this is a competition we won, realized. That was the very first one. At the same time, this was 2007. It was also the year that I was also working here at Harvard teaching. There was the master plan. This is our office at Delft. It's our office is based here in this very old city, where is also the Technical University. A master plan of Joan Bisquet from here. And we had some dreams. It was a railway station in combination with some municipal offices. So we had these sketches and these dreams. It was at the end a kind of, we have the European tenders. So we were one out of 4 or 5, I think, who were invited at the end. And this was our dreams. First we didn't win. There was a whole complicated issue about this competition, but at the end we won. So this is that whole zone of Delft, making the railroad tracks underground. So what is quite unique in the Netherlands that you make a kind of underground railway station, what we normally don't do because there's a lot of water underground. So it became almost like a subway station, with on top of it the municipal offices, the city hall. 2015, because you told me I should not explain projects, but now it's like 8 years later. It's almost finished. The railway station is now opened. We still have to finish partly the municipal offices. And what I also think, because like Craig, you were comparing, is something exactly the same as it was what you did in the beginning. I think the whole philosophy is still the same, but I cannot almost not imagine that you do everything right on the same moment. Maybe I said why I hate competitions, because I need a client. I think we are not autonomous artists. You always need this client or this kind of situation. Because what I take as an attitude, if I don't have a client, then I play the role that I'm also the client. What should be my, what I would want to have to happen in that building. That's what I did with most of the buildings we did designed. No client, then I'm the client myself. I take that role. So this is the building now. It's opened, the railway station, and I think now 3 or 4 weeks ago. Also to think about the materialization is always also a big issue. And so what we did here with the glass, we've tried to combine here traditional values with innovative materials, because that's a city of Delft. It's the city of Vermeer. It's the city of the Delft blue. It's a very famous Dutch city, but in the same time it's a technical university of innovation. So we wanted that to be that part of the building. So here where you enter, so the surprise, on top is the municipal offices, but here is the railway station hall, and next to it, it's not opened yet, is the city hall, the entrance of the city hall. So here is the hall with the old map, reinterpretation of an old map of Delft, with the tiles around it, the combination. It's a very intimate, nice railway station, but fits also to the scale of Delft. Okay, then 2007, it was the same year, because it's interesting that you have these, because at the same time you're developing same ideas. So this is Kaohsiung, Taiwan. It's a former military compound in a harbor city. And I remember that going there for the very first time, I just saw barracks, empty barracks, barking dogs and trees. It was an open competition. It was first, I think you had to submit it with your stuff. Hello, I'm me. And then I think they invited 60 architects to do a sketch, and we did. And then we got to 6 last ones that we made these steps. And I always need, because I'm the architect that always needs to go on site and try to understand it, so to make it, again, to play the role, to be also to the client. So I was it's a very nice country, Taiwan. It's very informal, the Chinese opera on street. So we made these local trees, we transformed it in a public building with public space. It's huge. It's the biggest performance art center of Asia, maybe even in the world, built at the same time. It's a concert hall, it's a lyric, it's a playhouse, it's a recital hall and an open-air theater, owned with its own atmosphere, own foyer, where it touches, we put a roof over all of it, and where the roof touches the park, it becomes an open-air theater. It's totally porous, totally what's the climate? I'm a little bit tired. A tropical building with a unique space. So this is what we did. It's also funny for me to look back what kind of drawings you made at that time. But here, this is interesting, talking about competition. We won that competition. We were called Mecanoo, yeah? I remember, and you look at my face, because I said, okay, I always say the competition, you first have the hot shower, and then you get the cold shower. And As I said, and how are we going to solve this? You know, because you have to realize it. And because it's big, there are typhoons, there's tropical, there's earthquakes, it's lyric, it's a concert hall with 2,000 seats, testing the acoustics. It's now under construction. But also it's funny what you did at that time. This was then 2007, I said. We made this whole model out of soft wood because we have a model maker and we just made it all by hand. And we thought we were very proud of it. But imagine that now, we also now make these parts. We have now 3D printer, but at that time we didn't have it. Maybe nobody had it. Yeah, maybe here. You had it maybe. It's also testing this, because like you said, you worked for I don't know how many years on Egypt. This is now, you go there to a country for 10 or 12 years. I'm now 2007, now 9 years, yeah. This is 2012. It's amazing. It's such a nice city to work for. And what we also did, as I told you, I really need the process, because in a way we knew how to make the theaters and the concert halls, but we didn't know to make this tropical space, because it's outdoor space, it's open, it's very humid, it should be hefter-proof, we don't want to close it. How to realize it? So we took many options, and at the end we went to the shipbuilders industry. So we build it now, and that's also the way we make the detailing with the local shipbuilder industry. So that's for me really, I needed this process. I couldn't come that, and I think even if I had proposed it at the competition, nobody would have believed it. So here you see it's now under construction. It will be opened next year. This is still under construction pictures, and. Then this is now Library of Birmingham. I just want to tell you that you just get a plot, and you get a brief with numbers. But I really need to look at the people and to look at the site, to how to find a strategy, how to make your dream come true. This was a competition, a tender, like in Europe, and you had to tell your vision. So I just told my dreams. It was we were not even allowed to make a competition. And I'm now looking what I told as a dream, and that's in a way really realized. Although it was not, I made some sketches, but not really the way it was. And then this one, because I think I should tell this one. Now it's in time, but then it's now I'm in Boston. So this was the competition in Boston. In Dudley Square. This is how Dudley, Roxbury looks like. It's that plot. This was the building. So I just made it had already the Mecanoo blue. So I thought, that's for me. So we tried to imagine what could happen. I told them a dream, and I was also impressed. I like to walk around in neighborhoods. It's more complicated neighborhoods. But I see, and then we were selected. But then you really need to talk to your client. And I had the possibility to go on top of the building. I said, hey, wow, this is the best view of Boston. Why should we not give it to the public? And very complicated. I told them that they should also buy, they only had one building, but I said, buy also the other two. And the mayor did it. So then we had to suddenly 3 historical buildings in our project, and on a very complicated site. And then also it was the site where there used to be the elevated train. And the people really wanted to have someday also that they could remember. I wanted to make the building a kind of jazzy, I always said, because it was a very energetic lot in the memories of the local population. It's a lot of Afro-Americans. So this is the project where we kept the 3 corners, symbolizing bringing the whole neighborhood together. And also this project, we really did it. We won it, but we really did it in a very collaborative way with the local partner and with the old people and the mayor of Thomas Menino, of course, was very important for us. And I really, because in a way it was just an office building, but I really wanted to create public space into it and public program, and we succeeded in that. And that, I think, also with my Dutch attitude, where we it's urban renewal. We always work together, and that's what I could bring. I would say that it's a kind of Bostonian bricks with a Dutch touch. But in a way, it was my background from 30 years ago to work in this kind of neighborhoods. So to make a building, an office building, also public, I think is very unique. The terrace with a view, it's the best terrace. The building will be open Saturday. It's the best terrace of. So and also to seduce people, the client, because I wanted to have beautiful bricks that would really reflect and show craftsmanship. So we made a little model and we glued all the wooden pieces to seduce them to do it, and they did it at the end. This is the brickwork of Dudley. Okay, there's a lot of murals, so we started also to design our own mural. And in Mecanoo blue, we made the whole map of Boston, because it's for the Boston public schools, also to show for the children all the neighborhoods where they're coming from. Here, and this is the picture I just made on my iPhone 2 hours ago. They're cleaning up for the opening Saturday. It was through a competition, but more interview-like. So this is how it looks like, and this is, I hate them, I love them. Thank you.
So good evening, and thank you very much to Jerold, David, everybody else involved. I guess my role is to be the link now to our conversation in part. I think when we talk about competitions, we're always in one sense expecting that the competitions will bring about something different, something unexpected. I remember a few years ago I was having a conversation with Art Gensler, and I think a lot of you know Art Gensler. Art Gensler is a very well-known American architect who really did something different. He trained as an architect, but then he started a company that was actually doing interiors. And from interiors, he then went on to now have what is a kind of full service firm that is doing all sorts of things. In one of the conversations, he said that it was the job of the firm to give the client what they wanted. They really didn't have any style at all. And what was important for them is to basically be able to listen to the client and based on what they heard, to give the client what they wanted. So it seemed like it was a way of discussing architecture that was completely naturalized. There wasn't anything, in a way, that was supposed to be coming from the architect as a style, let's say, or something that was a kind of deliberate intention. Of course, this is a firm that has many intentions, and they do a lot of different kind of work. But today, I think a lot of practice is in some way focused on the question of trying to give the client what they want, and that's not a bad thing. I think that's a good thing. But the way in which that goodness, that thing is delivered to the client, does raise certain questions about the relationship of architecture to the client, the relationship of architecture to contemporary practice. And I think the history of competitions, which goes back a long, long way, is exciting and is interesting precisely because of the fact that it has a certain level of distance. It has a kind of distanciation between the client and the architect, and it leaves that room for dreaming, for doing things that are unexpected, and for also, this is something that Lucan said, was that the competition was, in a way, the gift of the architect to architecture. It was a kind of gift to architecture. Therefore, it's always, there is a certain level of explicitness of of a thesis kind of condition that is involved in the idea of the competition, because you are presenting something that fulfills the criteria that is established by the client. At the same time, it represents something of what you believe in, the kind of philosophy that you have, if you like, as a practice. Therefore, it's also a way of seeing or discussing the advancement of architecture, precisely because of the fact that it tries to encapsulate this concept of what it's representing at this particular moment. This particular project, which is the Adolf Loos's submission for the Tribune, the Chicago Tribune Tower of 1922, is one of those projects that actually represents a certain level of a polemic, if you like. It very much represents Adolf Loos's idea of architecture both as a tomb and a monument. And therefore, the Doric column is, in a sense, something that was important as part of a series of significant projects that were submitted during that time. The winning competition and the one that was built was actually a very kind of backward-looking neo-Gothic project, and yet the projects of Saarinen, Gropius, Meyer, Hilbesheimer, and Adolf Loos were the ones that lost this competition. So you also imagine what could have been the nature of contemporary American architecture if actually some of those projects had been realized. So I'm going to just show you a few slides which, in the same kind of personal manner of the previous two speakers, are in a way part of something that I've witnessed in terms of the history of architectural competitions that I feel carry this idea of, if you like, they stand for something, and they're things, they're competitions that are memorable, and the ones that we remember in one sense. So I think one of the ones that starts in the late 50s is really this project of Utzon for the Sydney Opera House, which now, as a project, in a way gets to stand for the whole of Australia. As an icon, because it's probably the image of that building that gets represented and repeated more than any other image, probably. But it's also about the way in which the role of this building, both as an expression and also as a piece of engineering, becomes part of a kind of investigation. It's actually something that's very difficult to do. And therefore, the risk that's involved in this kind of project that goes from the 50s to the 70s it's already been referred to in the case of other projects like the Alexandria Library, that sometimes these things are also outside of the so-called expected or normative kind of time frame. And that's also an aspect of the competition, which is that of risk. Closer to home, I think this is a project that probably in the 70s and even early 80s, but in the 70s, came to represent something for a lot of architectural students, because this is the Boston City Hall. It's a building that was absolutely hated by our mayor here in the city of Boston, but actually it was seen as something very important, as a building that represented the face of the public, the inclusion of monumentality as a face of public architecture, which I think is also another aspect of the competitions in terms of the degree to which they represent this sense of their publicness. And they have the capacity to communicate, precisely because that's one of the elements that attracts the jury, is really the degree to which the project has the capacity to communicate with an audience. Another one that you will all remember is the Pompidou Center, and I think the Pompidou Center is another one of those projects where people who were more or less architecture students won this particular project and really created a building where it was completely unusual in terms of the manner in which the services and the structure is on the outside of this particular building. Therefore, it was a building that also represented a particular kind of idea, full of problems in terms of, for example, the maintenance and the cost that to this day it has to be kind of repainted probably more than most other museums, but nevertheless an extraordinary project in terms of what it's done as a public building for the citizens of Paris. I think at one point there were these statistics, I don't know if they still exist, that many more people actually climbed the outside of this building than ever entered the building, because the building became a way of seeing Paris, because you went up the escalator, and that was the building was really the kind of the element that revealed the city to you, which was also an interesting thing. I remember things like the Pompidou Center and really the kind of the outcome of that and the controversy that was around that. Another sort of project that was very important in the 80s is this project that was never built. This is Zaha Hadid's Hong Kong Peak competition. And for those people who are keen on the relationship between architecture and the city, I think these kinds of explorations, the drawings that Zaha made at that time, were extraordinary to actually let you imagine the location of an architectural project and also its relationship to a bigger context. And at the same time, they were very important in terms of how competitions, or more at that time, the discussion of paper architecture, could really itself be, thank you, could itself be a kind of significant way to explore an architecture that people thought it couldn't really be built, because these were buildings that didn't have any structure, they defied sort of gravity, and gradually these competitions were very important to actually enable Zaha to build something. But I think it was through these competitions where again, the kind of the exploration dimension was developed. At pretty much the same time, I think this is 1982, there was also the La Villette competition. And I remember distinctly seeing both this drawing and this drawing one night when the two competitors were actually presenting these two. Many people preferred this version to this version. But this was a scheme that was actually presented in a very coherent way by Bernard Tschumi for La Villette. In terms of lines and points, and Rem's project, which was about these kind of striations of activity. Also, both of these were very important as drawings in a way, and how drawings were used to explore a certain set of themes. And you saw that, you see that with La Villette. That's of course one of Bernard's pavilions. And this was the kind of model that was important in terms of a series of event spaces for OMA. And I think to this day, this competition and this model, in part probably influenced by Frank Lloyd Wright, is one of their most exciting kind of propositions at the kind of urban scale. 1995, really a major competition. An important project is the Yokohama Port Terminal by two GSD graduates, one of them our own faculty, Farshid Mousavi now. And I think this project also did something very important in terms of the relationship of architecture to engineering, to the combination of landscape, public space, and architecture. I'm just going through these just to really make the point about the significance of open competitions as instigators of significant thought and opening things up, that perhaps wouldn't happen otherwise. These last two projects are ones that I've been involved with as the chair of the jury. This is the Taichung Opera House by Toyo Ito. And in a way, this project is, for me, the most important projects of Ito after Sendai Mediatek, because the runner-up for this competition was Zaha Hadid. And it was generally felt that Ito was onto something. He was really trying to work something out in terms of the relationship of these cave-like spaces on the interior of the building, and the kind of, at that time, even then, this is now going back to 2007 or something like that. It was very clear that the making of this space was going to be very difficult, and indeed it has been very complicated, again, talking about risk-taking and so on. But I think it's also something that is been worth the risk. In terms of the kind of trajectory of Ito's work, it did something after Sendai, and it's important to sort of recognize the importance of this. Something of the interior. This building is still not quite 100% finished. Another competition that I was involved with, you can't really get the sense of the whole project from the outside. This is OMA's project for Taiwan for a building that is very interesting in terms of how it organizes the stage, which is actually caught between two auditoria. So it gives you a different kind of flexibility. So both of these projects are projects where there are new experiments that are made in terms of the organization of space, and in terms of how the building, again, is this idea of a kind of gift to architecture. And we just heard about the fact that the Helsinki Guggenheim is going to have the exhibition, and it's obviously a demonstration of the enthusiasm that people have for competitions, where I've read somewhere that this competition has had 1,750 entrants, which is a huge number, and I just don't know actually how a jury even chooses 6 out of 1,750. In short, I think that it's really amazing that we're having this conversation, and I think that it's really valuable to recognize the way in which competitions can open up this realm of possibilities. Having said that, I think I do notice, especially in the States, that we have fewer of these open competitions. Open competitions are seen as involving too much risk. And we are, I suspect, are moving more and more towards shortlisted, pre-selected competitions, which is really taking me back to the wise words of Art Gensler, in the sense that they became a kind of studio-based practice. They have specialists, and airports, interiors, institutional buildings. And it means that clients are basically not willing to take the risk of going to the open competition, because by shortlisting 5 or 6 practices, it's really safeguarding the client's kind of situation. But it does mean also that the architects who are doing these projects, they are the ones who have done multiple airports, they've done multiple hospitals, they've done multiple universities, and therefore the element of surprise is less likely to occur, precisely because of the level of expertise and detailed knowledge that is coming into the way that these competitions. Some of the ones that I showed you, like the Taiwan ones, they're actually a hybrid model. They have both a kind of open as well as some that are pre-selected, which has certain benefits. But I do think that it would be wonderful to, once again, especially in the US, to be able to have more open competitions, to really have the opportunity to see greater role for experimentation and for really sort of like promoting this idea of competitions as a gift to architecture. Thank you.
They want me there.
Maybe you should go up there now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Thank you.
You're up here now.
You all are here. You two sit in the middle in the hot seat. We're mic'd, right? So it was so great, Orson, to be reminded of all of those great competitions and what came out of them. And I think it's so interesting that, Renzo Piano was like Craig Dykers before he won Alexandria. Nobody heard of him. He did the Pompidou, and now he refuses to do competitions.
By the way, the people who wrote the program for Pompidou also wrote the program for Alexandria
Oh,
Library.
really?
Same people.
Oh, interesting. So, anyway, so I just thought I would start by asking, what was the saddest competition you ever lost?
I know.
There must be a lot of those. But you don't talk about the ones you lose.
I think for me was the most upset, because it's also the way they organize competitions. For instance, was a competition for the City Hall of new City Hall of Rotterdam. It's the city where I live, and then they did invite, I don't know how many, and that they had a whole process that you had to show it to the audience. You had to show to all the. It was a whole process that people even could vote for it and whatever. And at the end, they selected Oma because they always wanted to have Oma. So, but then I think a client should select the client they want, but then don't get us to do all the work if you already know that. So I also want an honest position. If we are honest, I also want the jury or whoever decides also to be honest. I think that's something, but at the same time, we are all human beings, and so in a way, at a certain moment, I decided all these competitions is for me like a laboratory, and I joined a laboratory to test things and dancing, like testing things. So,
How much of your practice would you say is responding to competitions?
Oh, I have no clue. I don't have. That's I say. This is the first time in my life that I talk about
A
competitions.
lot, though.
Tomorrow you're going to
ours
learn
is
a
a
little
lot.
bit about
I don't know the number either, but I would say ours is a lot. I don't know the number.
I love to do public buildings. So most of the public buildings in Europe or
Europe,
whatever is more or less a tender, and then you have different kind of tenders or competitions. But I don't think we enter. I don't know if you still enter open competition, but normally we don't do it.
Yeah, normally we don't. Once in a while, it's kind of fun.
Yeah.
Did you both enter Helsinki?
No,
I did.
I didn't. No. I said no chance.
Yeah, we did that one. Sometimes, there's like pressure in the office. Sometimes when you're in the grind of things, some of the younger people need to, stretch their wings a bit. Like they've been doing toilet schedules for 3 months. Okay, do the Guggenheim.
To what extent, I think it was interesting, it's always interesting to look at the Chicago Tribune competition because it really, unlike a lot of competitions, it actually did very good things for those losers who you named. That was everybody knew that Elio Saarinen was second, and it sort of made his career in America and so forth, and they became very well known. To what extent do you feel when you enter a competition and you don't win, but that work, that research, the ideas that you push, to what extent can you repurpose them? Is it a part of your practice, or does it sort of go out the window?
I don't know about you, but there is a psychological sort of trauma that is associated with losing, and you ask yourself, did I lose because of what I did or because of something else? And you then say to yourself, well, if it was because of what I did, then can it really translate? Is it, to return to it, is that a sensible thing? The only way you can come to an answer, I think, is through dialogue and debate, and you have to have your own answer. Nobody can tell you that, I don't think.
Is it useful for you, for instance? Oh, go ahead. Sorry, Craig.
No, please, go ahead.
And also, it doesn't mean that you think that you always was the best, because sometimes they really selected a better one.
Yeah.
So, and then I really I always congratulate because you don't think that your thing was always the best. And that's also interesting. And I said, there's a love and hate. And also in the whole rhythm of the office, it's nice because sometimes you work on projects like a team 5 or 6 years. It's so nice to do then also have the quick speed of other things. So I always try to see things positive. So and this research part was interesting, but at the same time, I love to make a project with with a client. But in a way, also what you said, in a way, I also like competition. Even if there's no competition, I always feel very.
But I suspect a
that you
lot of
want to do
people
a
do
good thing.
recycle the ideas, because I think when you are doing sometimes the competitions, you are kind of pushing for some things maybe a little bit more experimental that leads to some ideas, and maybe the ideas from some competitions still survive in other projects.
What a challenge I find right now is, as we grow more and more litigious or more legal in our work, it used to be when you lost a competition, you could, call them up and say, great, tell me, debrief me, what did we do wrong or what did we do good? And they'd be happy to tell you. Now they won't tell you because they're afraid they're going to get sued.
Oh,
So
really?
so they'll say, well, it's not our policy to reveal the decision-making process. We've made the decision and therefore it stands. Or they'll say, you did fine, you were great, you were the best. But still you lost, and so it's harder and harder to make those determinations.
Is that in the United States, or is that really beyond the? I can see it being here, but most
Certainly in the
countries are not
US.
as litigious as we are.
More so in the U.S., but I found it in other countries too. But like I said, even competitions are becoming more legal. As I mentioned, at certain ones like European Central Bank, there were more lawyers on the competition jury than there were architects.
You kind of wonder why a bank. Well, it's a public bank, I guess.
Yeah,
it's
it's a
like
European bank.
So they have to go through the.
By the way, I wanted to mention one thing in relation to your talk, Moisen. I've been reading these wonderful biographies of Filippo Brunelleschi, and that was a competition, which the Dome in Florence, and the descriptions of how that competition was carried out, what occurred after he won the competition, how the design was treated, how the second prize winner tried to steal it. Everything is identical 600 years ago as it was today.
One of the things I wanted to ask you, I thought it was interesting how you pointed out that Alexandria was built almost, precisely as you designed it, how much it stuck. But that doesn't always happen. I mean, as you said, some of these open competitions, and when they really get down to the budget and a lot of other factors, then you're, as you said, you're fighting for your design.
I wanted to clarify. Francine is correct. A design shouldn't be, you shouldn't just hold on to it. It should change. And what I meant to say, or if I wasn't clear, the conceptual foundation of the project was strong enough that it could withstand a lot of change. So if you look at each of those plans, what was built and what was delivered, really a lot of change, hundreds and hundreds of changes. It's just that somehow the power of the thing managed to hold on to itself even with change. So I would say in response to your comment, if you've got a good idea, Centre Pompidou, look at that drawing and then compare it. Yeah, they don't look anything the same, but they are identical to one another.
The ideas.
But
Yeah.
I mean, a lot of clients also now, for a variety of reasons, they actually don't want the project. They want, like you were saying in part with you, it's the relationship. Because it's not just being litigious, but also a lot of the so-called signature architects, they scare the hell out of a lot of clients. So they want to meet the architects and actually discuss process, working relationship, things like that, more than the actual project. So I think that's also, there are lots of competitions which are really not competitions about a project, but it's competitions to select the team.
Yeah.
It's another type that you didn't really get into. It's not a design of project. It is to sort of see how you, I heard of.
By the way, I did want to mention one thing. A positive attribute of design competition is that if you win on the basis of the design, at least you can constantly use that as the anchor around which everyone focuses their energy. If you win a competition through a negotiation process where the design isn't necessarily there, then you have to negotiate the design all the way through the process, which can be fun. I'm not saying it's not fun, but it's different than having this kind of rock that you've thrown into the water and everybody's having to deal with the waves. One might say that your ability to create a stronger design could be better if everyone agrees on the design before you start to have the personal relationship.
But I've also been involved in a competition not so long ago where a winning project sort of, it was selected, and a year and a half or 2 years later, the client completely changed that competition, so that the project that's being built or has been built has absolutely nothing to do with the one that was selected, and that also speaks of the power of the client.
Yes.
Who really has.
It's not just the project. Did they get rid of the architect and go to another architect?
No.
But
It's the same
but
architect.
that's happened too.
Yes.
Francine, have you ever entered a competition and just thought the program, something about the rules, something about were just completely wrong and just done it your way anyway?
I'm Dutch, so I do this anyway. But also I had to learn this because first, of course, I did the projects, the competitions in the Netherlands. But then, for instance, if you go to Germany, then if you go even 1 centimeter out of the border of your plot, then you're kicked out by law. So it is. You also have to learn all these things. What kind of attitude you can take. So not every country, every culture is different. Every country is different. Every jury is different. But I think you have also to have an awareness, like because most of these tenders are most of the time public buildings. It's public money. Because you said, it's nice to have a present for the architects, but in a way you should give a present to the people who are going to use it. So we should have to balance it, that you really want, and until now we succeeded in that, because I was thinking, I really did a competition that I won that did not become good.
But they said
I don't
it's
think so yet.
not a present to the architect, a present to architecture.
Yeah, to architecture,
Which could be also a present to the user.
But it should be both. And I think that's, and of course, it's also, I think we also had a zeitgeist where the things, sometimes it was more for the architect than, and I think it's also that's what happened. We can also complain about, some attitudes of some architects who made that maybe happen like this.
I want to open this to questions from the audience in a minute, but I just wondered, I mean, you actually just said something, Craig, very positive about competitions, and I do understand the dice. You've got dice, you've got scales. We don't have dice up there now. But when you look at something like the Helsinki Guggenheim with, I don't know, 1,000, however many people, doesn't it just seem like a ridiculous roll of the dice? But did you ever just get disillusioned and think, why am I doing this?
We had 1,400 for Alexandria.
And the Egypt one was also, the Cairo one was also like that.
Monstrous.
Your central bank was also so many.
Yeah.
Does it feel like you've been through a rigorous competition or you've won the lottery, or does it matter?
Well, I remember after we won Alexandria and we built it, there was a feeling that,
Had you been built to the, that you have the time to go to the site?
Yes.
You have been there?
Before.
Yeah.
But the feeling was after we built it and after we had won and all of that, it was like as if we had gone to the moon. And we'll never have a chance to do that again. So when we entered the opera, which was also an open international anonymous competition with about 600 people that registered, we thought this is an impossible thing to do twice. And we didn't enter until the very last second because we were sure we wouldn't get it. And so, I think you tend to feel some positive direction about it. But the truth is, I think it's like that all the time, even when it's not a design competition. If I try to get a project for a commercial building, say an office in New York City, I'm competing against, 300 more networked people than I am. It's just not a design competition. It's a emotional competition.
We're always competing.
We'd love to hear some questions from some of you, and I'm sure you have them for these three people. Yeah.
One of the questions around the conference is if the competition process actually produces better design or more interesting designs and thus kind of benefits society more than traditional procurement. So of course that's difficult to say what's better, but in your own practices, can you say if the projects that are produced out of a competition have maybe a more daring or exciting concept, or is there anything that you could distinguish about the projects that come out of competition as opposed to traditional procurement?
I already gave my opinion on that, which is there's no silver bullet. Yeah, you can get great buildings from competitions, design competitions, from open design competitions, from invited design competitions. You can get great buildings from traditional procurement. So I'm not sure that the question is necessarily relevant. Maybe more it is, you know, if you're taking one route or another, how can you better improve any of those routes so that there's a wide variety of healthy possibilities in the world. The more important issue for me is that there's the variety, that we don't stick to one thing or another, and that creates a kind of a challenge. That's my.
No, but I think that I don't disagree with the idea that there are lots of different ways of getting good results. I think one advantage of the competition that is probably related to this conference is about the way in which people who wouldn't normally have the opportunity to demonstrate their capacity, they get that chance. So I think competition is just the fact that you get, you know, whether it's 300 or 1,700, you're going to see a lot more options of what people do. And I think that exposure, the publication of that exposure, that is something that's really valuable and is important. And so it's not necessarily that everything that is produced in that competition is better than, you know, something that would get done in an office. But the fact is that it actually opens the possibility of seeing things that you wouldn't see otherwise. It also theoretically opens up the possibility of a conversation about those things. Even the 6 of the Guggenheim that have been shortlisted, presumably there would be some mechanism for discussing the pros and cons. I don't know to what degree the conversation does occur, because I don't think that it actually does occur the way that it should, because the nature of criticism has also changed in terms of how we discuss things, how we discuss projects, how those things are published. But I think it's the exposure and the variety which is really a critical part. And I think also because of the younger generation of people would get an opportunity that they normally wouldn't have. I think that's also enormously important.
And competitions in the age of the internet are completely different. I mean, anybody can access. I mean, the access to these Guggenheim is very different from a major competition 20 or 30 years ago. So I think that's part of the whole educating people about ideas, and maybe more satisfying to architects who compete but don't make it, but they know they've made an effort, they've tried something, and they're going to get some kind of exposure.
I'm sure you've had this, but the real scary situation is when they do a competition, there's a jury, and then they put all the projects out for the public to vote on. Boy, that is scary. Like, I remember the Oslo Opera, the #1 public choice was a giant pearl with like a pearl inside of it, and I was like, oh, wow. I'm glad.
You said, I wish I'd done that.
Yeah. But it's intriguing because when you were saying earlier about Art Gensler, you know, giving people what they want, I mean, I definitely feel for that. But at the same time, if everybody wants giant pearls, you know.
Yes, gentleman in the blue sweatshirt.
Your story, Snøhetta's story, and as we learned today, Mecanoo's story is the Cinderella story we all hope to achieve, to start our practice by winning a competition. But we also know for every competition that you win, there's 1,000 others losers. So the competition industry is sustained by cheap labor and cheap time. So before you had the luxury of entering only invite competitions, did you have any criteria to decide which open competitions to dedicate your efforts to? And today when you do competitions, how do you distribute labor around it? Because there are competition junkie firms that have 5 full-time workers and 20 informal employees churning out competition.
Maybe I also want to say for instance, why I mentioned now the Kruisplein competition, what was famous in the Netherlands. It was why they did organize that competition, because the clients wanted change. They thought housing was terrible. They wanted to have change. So they did a lot of research, and they asked everybody from just the Netherlands, but in a way Holland was is still quite good in housing, that they wanted to have change. So we all entering were part of this laboratory from client side and from city side, was very interesting. Maybe you remember it, I don't know, because you're also from Holland. But it was very interesting as a huge laboratory from client side, because for me also, if I enter a competition open, I want to research something. And I want to, because I think we also have a job that at the end you also give your energy to the society. So whatever you lose or whatever, but then you are part of a bigger laboratory. But if you just enter a competition for somebody who is too lazy to select his architect, then yeah. So it's also different why you participate. We also didn't earn anything. I remember that we counted our hours. I think even realizing that very first building when I was a student, I think we counted that we earned €1 an hour, not even.
You should go online and look at the Van Alen survey. It's really interesting, and the recommendations. This is going to come up tomorrow, but this whole issue about working for zero, turns out nobody really likes to do that.
But there's something I should say, though, and that is that, for example, in our office, we pay everyone, including the interns, so we actually can't afford to really do the powerhouse stuff. But we've won many competitions, including, for example, San Francisco MoMA against, I think, almost every big-name architect around at the time. And when I saw their submissions, they had watercolor printed, leather-bound books. We had about 15 pages of 11 by 17 copies that we made in-house and stapled together. It was the idea that won. So you don't have to spend a lot of time and money. I mean, we spent time and money, but it was in a different way. Same with Alexandria. We put that one circular drawing. And that thing just kind of burned into their head.
Yes, you, sir.
I want to ask about ideas competitions popularized by, Van Alen and others. Do we think those are also a gift to architects?
That's a great question, I think. I like that one. I don't know about you, but I'm kind of caught. I don't always like the ideas competitions. I sometimes feel that they are things that just kind of flap in the wind. On the other hand, they get people doing things, and they get people energized, and they get people to talk. And it's like psychotherapy. It like doesn't have any real impact at the time, but weeks later you go, hey, that was good.
Yes.
Craig, in your decision tree, I saw one branch was teams, and I've seen a lot of competitions that require an architect, developer. They want real numbers. They want a risk partner.
Yeah.
And I didn't see where you made the decision when it went there.
Oh, it was a complex matrix, so you don't just follow it and then it gives you an answer. You have to weigh everything all together. But I would say, and I did mention in that matrix, the biggest issue is often cost. Because there's no such thing as client university, I wish there were. Every client should have to go to university and get a degree before they could be a client. And if they did, they would probably budget the projects in different ways. But as it is, you tend to budget projects, especially cultural projects, politically first. So you put a number out there that the politicians will agree on, and then you ask for an architect to make a design that may or may not fit within those budget parameters, and then basically it's all hell breaks loose. So we often go into those projects now with a clear strategy on how to manage the cost inside of our delivery. But if they ask for a cost estimate prior to seeing the design, this is a real problem, because you can lose. And of course, everyone lies, right? Like, if you were to really put down the cost of your project, you'd be kicked out immediately. So.
But you said a lot of them, the designs are submitted and nobody's put a cost, even gone through the exercise of estimating costs.
Yeah, and how can you estimate costs on something that doesn't actually have walls made of something?
But I think one of the issues that is coming up in some of the questions is around the whole, if you like, the ethics of competition, which is what you were referring to. And I think this is a really complicated issue. I don't think anybody should pretend for a moment that competitions are all wonderful and there's no negative side to it, and they do represent, I mean, this whole thing of the way in which the competition now is actually becoming even more design and build competitions, and how that compromises things. The ideas thing, you could say that, well, if the ideas are sometimes important and there's a mechanism for documenting that, for understanding that, for disseminating that, then yes, it's worthwhile. If it's just getting work done to be able to use the idea without actually paying anybody, then it's not. So it's really hard to have a sort of definitive support for competitions as a kind of without any worry. I mean, they can be really wonderful. It's like your love and hate thing. I mean, it's sort of good and bad at the same time, and that's hard, how to judge this question of the ethical side.
Well, my point, or what I mentioned, is that we as architects ask other people to work for free all the time. So when we send out our construction documents for bids, we ask all of those builders to put in bids for free. We don't pay them, and that's hard work to go through a set of drawings and do a cost
they
estimate.
were paid.
Yeah, they're better in Europe than they are
Well,
here.
but you also meet with clients and go down the road without getting a job necessarily, potential clients, it's true. But the fact of the matter is, I think the public or people outside architecture view competitions as kind of a form of the democratization of design, that everybody gets a chance, and and we all know it's much more complicated than that. The juries are more complicated, what's going on behind the scenes is more complicated, and then what's happening, which is why I think this conference is so great, because it's an opportunity to shine the light on it from the point of view of architects. We're going to take one more question if you have one. Yes.
Thank you. I'm wondering from your perspective if you think that our politicians and our elected officials have an understanding and capacity for design competitions. And has that changed recently, or do you think that they're so risk adverse that it's the exception rather than the rule?
You want a competition run by public officials? Boston, Roxbury.
Boston, yeah, but and also it was run by architects and people from the city and people from the neighborhood, but it was not these. It was more on a visionary part, or I did it in a visionary part. We could even go to each other presentation. It was very. I didn't go, but you could go to each other presentation, and it was. They selected us at the end. But in a way, they trusted us so much. They really, I felt that we made a good solution for that one. So, and also other. Don't think that people are stupid. I just want to say, if you are a good leader, if you show your vision and how to materialize, they believe you. They follow you. I've never had any problems with it, to be honest.
Probably the worst.
Without making popular architecture, I could really take that leadership always.
The worst condition I've been in, of course, was the World Trade Center site, where you had this terrible event, and of course the politicians were all over it, and so they were saying things that were clearly, irrational, because it had to do with their electorate. We'll rebuild this in 5 years. And of course it was obvious that you could not rebuild it in 5 years. Or we will build this for, this much money. Or we will make this thing. And the politicians were all fighting against each other to be the sort of lead voice. In that case, it really did damage. But in other cases, it can work.
But it changes so much from country to country. I mean, in places like China, there is the worry about corruption and the role of the competition as something that has to be above board and no preferential treatment. In a place like Taiwan, it's about the democracy of, if you have foreign architects, then it must also be open to local architects, and therefore the idea of the hybrid is a way of introducing that kind of democracy. I think in the States we have so much worry around the question of the risks represented by competitions that we really don't use the idea of competitions as a form of public manifestation or public good in the way that is still reasonably, relatively common in Europe, even though in the question of who evaluates these things is going to be very, I mean, I just came back from Germany, and you talk to people about the jurors in German competitions, it's like really very different than how it would happen in France or maybe in Switzerland or somewhere like that.
Spain.
And yet we have had, for example, through the visions of very few individuals with the GSA, somehow a number of really successful competitions, you know. But these have been also mainly for federal courthouses and for border stations, two building typologies that are really very much about questions of the sort of the disciplining of or the use of architecture as a form of kind of discipline in some way. And we don't really have these competitions for other buildings that are slightly more generous, if you like, than what the federal courthouses or the border controls represent. But yet I think the people who were behind those, they really tried to get some very interesting buildings out of them. So perhaps we need to kind of like open it up to a different idea of the public, right? And the ones where still this idea of the monumental or the disciplinary is such a sort of fundamental part of the ethos of the design.
Can I add something? But I also realized that you here in the United States, you're different because you don't have so many public buildings. Because I also remember, like Dudley now, they tried to keep it for 40 years to leave it up to the market, but the market never responded it. Or normally that the city became the client of such a building normally never happens. And then also makes part of it public what we wanted to do.
But why don't we have...
but also most of your musea in Holland, they are all public. You have most that are wealthy clients who select their own architects. So there is a totally different, every country is different, but you have a totally different portfolio.
I guess I'm in a...
Isn't it? Or not?
I don't know, I must be in a different planet here, because I think 90% of our work here is through something like design competitions here in America. I'm getting, we have very few private commissions.
But I suspect a lot of your competitions are not open, 100% open.
Oh, no.
They're
That's
invited.
what I mean.
No, of course,
that's the
they're not
difference.
open. That's
They're
It's
different.
hard to remember
Yeah,
the last
they're almost all invited.
wide open. This was such an interesting conversation, obviously just the start of one. We could go on and on. Thank you very much to Francine and Craig.
Thank you so much.
And to all of you for coming. Thanks so much. See you tomorrow. Jerold is going to...
So again, just quickly before you leave, let me just mention that we start here tomorrow morning, coffee at 8:30. 9 o'clock, the conference will start. You have the program, which will delve much more deeply into what this wonderful panel has given us this evening as food for thought. So again, thank you all very, very much.